Calm Health is here to help you better understand your own mental and physical health with a library of digital programs created by psychologists that you can explore at your own pace. Learn more at calmhealth.com.
What up, y'all? It's Joe Budden, here to talk about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to win real money while watching football. You can get up to 100 times your money.
Prize Picks will give you $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Just download the Prize Picks app and use code SPOTIFY. That's code SPOTIFY on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play a $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Journalists who have covered Donald Trump's rallies, and I'm one, know that it's an uncomfortable situation. He'll be giving a speech and mention the fake media or talk about reporters as the enemy of the American people. And then the crowd will all turn towards the press area and start pointing and booing. Trump has said he would jail reporters who don't reveal sources or take away broadcast licenses for outlets he doesn't like. So there's been a long-time standoff between the free press and a possible future president, which in these last few days leading up to the election has gotten a lot more real. I'm Hannah Rosen. This is Radio Atlantic. Recently, the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post at the 11th hour decided not to endorse a political candidate because their owners asked them not to. Both of these papers were going to endorse Kamala Harris. So the last-second decision certainly makes it look like they were backing off to appease Trump. Motives aside, though, this moment raises an urgent question. Can the Washington Post, the LA Times, us, the Atlantic, all of American journalism stand up to a second Trump administration? Today, days before the election, we have with us our own editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, to talk about what's really at stake in this endorsement story. Here's our conversation. As you know, the LA Times and the Washington Post made news for announcing they would not be endorsing in this presidential race. What was your reaction to that news?
My reaction was that they are not masters of excellent timing. If they had decided that, which is a perfectly fine position to take, and in retrospect, I kind of sort of wish we took that position in 2016.
You do?
Kind of. I just said kind of, sort of. That I think connotes ambivalence. I see both sides of the issue, but that's not the issue right now with the LA Times or the Washington Post. If you're going to decide that, decide it deliberately, decide it, I would say anytime except 2 weeks before the most contentious and possibly closest election in American history. The timing was exquisitely bad. I mean, you could not have chosen a worse time to make these decisions, and it's mind-boggling.
So what you're saying is it's perfectly legitimate for us to have a debate and for newspapers internally to have a debate about whether endorsements or not are appropriate because, you know, like Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, gave reasons in his op-ed for why he didn't think endorsements were appropriate. So that's a totally legitimate debate. It's just that the timing of it is not right.
Yeah, the timing was awful in that it created mistrust, anger, anxiety. It's way too late to make that decision. Put aside the practical arguments, which does it really change anybody's mind? Does it really do anything? I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to say that no journalism organization should speak in that kind of declarative voice. You have a bunch of columnists, you have opinion writers, you have all kinds of people, podcasters. They should talk about what they think is going on in the election. They could talk about who they think is better and who is worse. I get all the sides of it. It's a little late in the process to announce that you're not going to endorse.
The Post's owner, Jeff Bezos, he did defend the decision in his op-ed, saying Americans don't trust the news media, and this is a move to restore that trust. Setting the timing aside for a minute, what do you think of that defense?
Horseshit.
Really?
I think it's horseshit. I thought the whole first 3-4 paragraphs of that were horseshit. Blaming the victim. I mean, it's true. It's true. The media is very, very low in polls of trustworthiness, lower than even Congress at this point. But there's a reason for that. And a very large reason is that there's a concerted, multi-year, billion-dollar campaign to undermine public trust in traditional modes of American journalism. I mean, Elon Musk and Donald Trump are just two of the people who are organizing a campaign to make sure that Americans don't trust fact-based journalism. Fact-based journalism doesn't work for them, and so they are literally killing the messenger. And so for Jeff Bezos to write that we in the press have a problem and that no one trusts us without telling people, alerting people to one of the huge reasons why, strikes me as ridiculous.
I see. So it was horseshit because A, it doesn't apply to the Washington Post. The Washington Post is not part of the problem. And B, he didn't elaborate in any even remotely brave way about what he meant.
There's a war going on against the quote-unquote mainstream media. People who do not want to be investigated by mainstream journalists, by investigative reporters who are professionally trained to uncover things that powerful people don't want uncovered. The powerful people have organized themselves in a way to make sure that no citizen trusts what the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the networks, the Associated Press, Reuters, plus a whole bevy of other investigative outfits. They want to destroy our ability to communicate to people that we're trying. I mean, look, I'm not saying that we always get things right. We don't always get things right. But they have a vested interest in making sure that people don't trust those outlets because those outlets are investigating them. Mm-hmm. And for Jeff Bezos, who is part of the oligarchic class, obviously, for Jeff Bezos to write this op-ed or have it written for him without acknowledging this fundamental fact seemed to be absurd.
Mm-hmm. So readers, as we know, reacted by canceling their subscriptions, 250,000 so far.
Which is crazy.
Crazy. I have many friends who work on the Post. It's adding up to what? Is it a 10th or an 8th of their subscription
I think it's 10%
base?
of their subscription base.
Which has already been waning over the last many years.
Well, it did grow. I mean, it grew in the Trump era. A lot of people believed them, as they should have, when they said that Trump was a threat to the democratic order and to the American idea. They made their motto, literally, democracy dies in darkness. A large number of people who were opposed to Trumpism became subscribers. What do they think is going to happen to those subscribers? The feeling of betrayal. I mean, I've talked to so many people who canceled or were thinking of canceling. The feeling of betrayal was deep in ways that I was even surprised. And here was an example of Jeff Bezos not understanding the consequences of his decision-making.
Mm-hmm. One obvious conclusion, or even mild conclusion, is that Jeff Bezos is concerned about what Trump thinks, which leads me to think that if Trump wins, lots of newspapers might have to account for that in their decision-making and thinking. Like, it feels like that's how a chilling effect comes to be, is that you have to take into account what Trump thinks, even if it's minor, like I'll lose some customers or I won't get this contract or another contract, that you have to be thinking about that, and that becomes part of the decision-making.
Yeah. Look, I've no reason to disbelieve Bezos when he says that the meeting between Trump's people, and the Blue Origin, his space company, the CEO of that space company, that happened that same day, that was coincidental. He didn't even know. He runs a very large organization. That's completely plausible that he had no idea and that the timing was just terribly bad for him. Mm-hmm. The larger point is, if you have multifarious business dealings with the federal government and you're worried about a revenge-minded president with authoritarian predilections, it's asking a lot of a CEO not to take the threat that president poses into account when you make decisions, which suggests to me that he's not equipped to be the owner of a newspaper. The owner of a newspaper should place him or herself in a structurally oppositional frame of mind, which is you have to be counter-opportunistic. Oh, the government's going to cut my $3 billion contract? Screw them. I'm going to do what's right, and I'm going to stand up for the newspaper. If you're not equipped to own a publication, you really shouldn't. You just really shouldn't. And, the shame of this is that from everything I could see and everything that we all could see, he was pretty good at owning the Washington Post for a while.
Well, that makes me wonder if the industry as a whole is ready for a possible second Trump administration. I mean, what you just described sounds like a kind of stealing and bravery that you have to be prepared for. And if Jeff Bezos, who has a huge amount of power, like if he loses a chunk, what does it matter? If he can't do it, doesn't that make you worry about the industry in general?
Well, it depends person to person. I mean, Patrick Soon-Shiong, who is the owner of the Los Angeles Times, is in a different category. He and his family apparently just believe in meddling. I mean, they believe that, look, let me take one step back and note that ownership in the American system, ownership of a publication or a quality publication or a putatively quality publication in the American system is very complicated and counterintuitive. You buy a thing as a rich person, you buy a publication, a business, and then you have to promise not to interfere with the running of the business. That's the way it's worked traditionally. You have to literally. There's no other business that I could think of where you go out and buy a bakery, and the first thing the bakery manager tells you is, "Do not tell us what kind of bread to make."
Right.
And if you do, all your employees are going to excoriate you publicly. You'd kind of be like, "Well, I thought the fun part of owning a bakery is getting them to make bread I like."
Right. Right.
And this is what journalism is, and this is my relationship with our owner at The Atlantic. She turns over to me decision-making on all editorial matters. We have a relationship of trust and we communicate, and I use her as a sounding board all the time, and it's a healthy relationship, but she accepts the line that our culture has devised and that a healthy democratic culture devises, so that ownership is separate from editorial.
Right. Okay, earlier this month, The Atlantic endorsed Kamala Harris, which is the 5th time that the magazine has made an endorsement. Lincoln, LBJ, and then 3 times in the last 3 elections, all while Trump was the candidate and while you've been editor-in-chief. So why did you break the mold here?
The Atlantic promises its readers that it's going to be of no party or clique. That's written into the founding manifesto of The Atlantic, written in 1857 and signed by Ralph Waldo Emerson and Harriet Beecher Stowe and Herman Melville and Nathaniel Hawthorne and all the rest. And, I do not want to screw with those guys, right? I just don't want their ghosts haunting me. So we try very, very hard to be of no party or clique. But to me, the issue of Donald Trump is not an issue of party. I believe, and I think The Atlantic has expressed this belief in its journalism for 160-plus years. We believe that a strong conservative party, a strong conservative strain in American thinking, and a strong liberal strain, that makes a democracy healthy. Let these ideas battle it out and let the people decide who has the better idea. So we are, a big tent where we try to have differing opinions, but we don't support a particular party. And if Hillary Clinton in 2016 were running against Mitt Romney, John McCain, Marco Rubio, go Jeb Bush, name the list. We would have felt no urge whatsoever to endorse. But I look back, and others look back at the 1964 endorsement of Lyndon Johnson to try to understand what that was about. And it was not about Barry Goldwater's positions on taxation or about privatization of government resources, or even, in a way, foreign policy. It was about his demeanor. It was about his character. It was about his extremism, right? And so the endorsement of LBJ was less an endorsement of LBJ than a warning about Barry Goldwater's characterological defects. So when the subject of Trump comes up, we're not looking at what he thinks we should do about the taxation of tips, right? Or his position on NATO, as ridiculous as I personally find it. It's about his honesty. It's about his mental fitness. It's about his moral fitness. It's about his racism. It's about his expressed misogyny. It's about all those things. So it's not about party. It's not about ideas. It's about behavior and disposition and the threat that he poses.
Mm-hmm. Now, in any of these times, did you ever have doubts, like real serious doubts that you should do it?
No. Again, in retrospect, getting into it, and I understand where if Bezos had announced a year ago, you know what, we just don't want to do this anymore. I totally understand the arguments for not doing it. We did it with Hillary, and remember, we were also, like everybody, in a kind of shock. People who cover politics and know American politics, we were shocked that the Republican Party chose this person to be its standard bearer 4 years after it picked Mitt Romney and 8 years after it picked John McCain. How is this even possible, right? So in that shock and disbelief, I think we were more predisposed to say, you know what, this is so abnormal that we must say something. Then once you say it in 2016, then you see what he's done over 4 years. Then in 2020, how is it not possible to do the same thing? And then after January 6th, 2021, it seemed pretty obvious to me that we would have to keep going with these anti-endorsements.
And in your mind, does that shift the magazine's position to less of an observer critic and more of a participant in the election?
The magazine is a participant in the election in that members of the writers' collective of The Atlantic are pretty clear in many different ways about how they feel about Donald Trump, what they think about Donald Trump. So as a and by the way, we're not a resistance magazine, and I've said this over and over again. If we could run pro-Trump material that could pass through our fact-checking process, I would print it. Our goal is to say things that are true, right? And so we do have pieces from time to time that come in that do argue that ex-Trump policy is smart. We ran a piece recently by H.R. McMaster, his former national security advisor, who said, you know what, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of the things that he's done, maybe for the wrong reasons, maybe he executed them stupidly, but these ideas are good ideas. So we'll run pieces like that. Again, it just has to get through fact-checking. So, yes, it's a definitively different kind of decision when you speak in an institutional voice, no byline, and say, The Atlantic believes that X person should be president and not Y person. And yes, you can create an image out in the world that you are now aligned with a party. That's why I'm so sensitive on this question of being of no party or clique, because this is not about Republican. If the next election the Republicans nominate, God knows, near anybody, like I don't feel, as long as they adhere to basic notions of rule of law, as long as they exercise self-restraint in their behavior and speech, as long as they haven't been proven to try to have overthrown the government. I mean, I was down there on January 6th. I heard his speech, and then I walked down to the Capitol. I know what he did. There's two candidates in the race right now. One tried to overthrow the government. The other didn't. It's not that hard to say as an institution, we're against overthrowing the government.
Yeah.
And so, there are consequences to all these decisions, but I'm comfortable with the decision. As I said, there's a part of me that wishes that we hadn't gotten involved in that, but I'm also proud of the fact that we took these stands.
In what?
In institutional endorsement. In institutional endorsement.
Like if you could avoid it, you would.
Well, look, one of the lessons of looking back at the Atlantic, 1860, one of the great mysteries, by the way, haven't been able to figure this out. 1860, the Atlantic endorses Lincoln for president. 1864, no endorsement. It's like, what does a guy have to do?
Right.
Geez, Louis. Right. I don't know. I mean, I would love to find the papers that, if there are papers that communicate why they didn't run an endorsement. But anyway, you go from 1860 to 1964, you jump 104 years into the future before they endorse again. As the editor in the Trump presidency, in the Trump era, I've got to say, for 104 years, they managed not to endorse. That means something. And so, obviously there's going to be ambivalence in my thinking.
Okay, time to leave Lincoln and enter the future. After the break, we talk about what a second Trump era might look like. I'm Hannah Rosen.
And I'm Lauren Ober. And about a year ago, we met a new neighbor.
She'd moved to our Washington, D.C. neighborhood to get justice for her daughter,
who was shot and killed at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th.
Ashley Babbitt was absolutely murdered.
When we found out who our neighbor was, we could have decided to give her the cold shoulder. After all, January 6th was an assault on our city.
Or we could be neighborly. So that's what we did. Before we knew it, we'd fallen into this upside-down world where insurrectionists are heroes who might try to save our country a second time. Like, how long are you going to stay in D.C.?
I plan to stay till, January 7th.
And where our neighbor, kind of an icon.
Look inside yourself and be your own hero. Stand up and
We live here now. From The Atlantic.
Follow wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, it's Hannah from Radio Atlantic. I'm here to ask for a little favor. We're hoping to learn a little bit more about you, our listeners, and ask you a few questions. How did you discover our podcast? What do you think of the show? So we put together a short survey, and it would be very helpful if you could take a few minutes to answer it. You can go to theatlantic.com/survey. We'll have the link in our show notes, too. And as a thank you, the earliest respondents will get a $20 gift card. Okay, back to the show. All right, so you've touched on some of the stakes. Let's contemplate an actual Trump era. We're living in a Trump era. You yourself have faced specific, I'll take that back. The Atlantic has faced specific threats from...
No, you could say me. It's true.
Trump, and specifically in response to your reporting. So in 2020, you reported that Trump called veterans and fallen soldiers suckers and losers, which has clearly remained on Trump's mind.
Yeah.
Your recent reporting that he wished he had the kind of generals Hitler had also struck a chord. He's not a fan. He's interested in settling scores. Do you actually run through scenarios about the actual things that the magazine could face under a Trump presidency?
Sure. I don't want to go into specifics, but there are obviously, and again, I'm not trying to be dramatic here. I don't expect stormtroopers to come and try to padlock the doors of the Atlantic on January 20th if Trump should win or Trump should seize power in some manner or form. But there are obviously ways that someone bent on revenge could take his revenge, not just on the Atlantic, but a lot of the press and other institutions in American life. So of course we think about it, but there's exactly zero choice here. If you find out something that's true and it's relevant for your readers, you just gotta. I don't mean to sound self-righteous or anything, but that's literally the job. So you got to do it regardless of what the threat may be.
I mean, I actually do think about what it looks like because this is a relatively new situation for Americans, for American journalists. I do have trouble imagining what it would look like to operate in that kind of atmosphere. How does a president get in the way of American journalism?
Right. I mean, look, I'm not talking about us specifically now, but there have been discussions broadly across journalism. Obviously, one thing that Trump has talked about again and again is changing the libel laws, right? And this would require the Supreme Court to overturn a decision made in the 1960s about what constitutes libel. But it wouldn't surprise me if they, and people who are supportive of Trump fund efforts to make it harder for journalists to do their jobs vis-a-vis, nuisance lawsuits and trying to get legislation changed and trying to get the Supreme Court behind this legislation that would make it much easier to win libel suits against journalism organizations. So there's that. That's a threat. There are other things that can happen, obviously. Something that's been talked about a lot is the use of the IRS against enemies. I mean, obviously, in normal behaving administrations, you're not allowed to politicize the tax auditing process, but I don't put that past them, obviously. There are a bunch of things that you can do that don't involve, frog marching journalists to jail. I go back to this point they're helping to create an atmosphere that's comprehensively hostile to work that previous American presidents, I'm going all the way back to Thomas Jefferson now, previous American presidents understood was indispensable to the smooth functioning of democracy, which is to say, have a robust, independent press that could not be punished, jailed, silenced by a government.
So that's the thing that I most worry about is the shifting understanding of facts and truth. In your conversation with Barack Obama a couple of years ago, it was very interesting. He talked about how in his campaign, he used to be able to show up in places, say swing voter places, and convince people to change their minds about him. And then he told you that he doesn't really think that that would be true anymore because there's a world where new information, a new fact, a truth doesn't really move people. And I wonder if you think journalism is in a similar position. Like we used to be able to show up and give people new information, new facts, and we would hope that those things would move them. And now it seems to work less that way.
Well, yeah, I'll give you an example from my own work to buttress your point. So 4 years ago, I published a story based on sources that Donald Trump has repeatedly used the terms suckers and losers to describe American war dead and American war wounded. Obviously, very damaging story. And the criticism from the White House, Donald Trump's White House at the time was, well, you don't have any evidence. You don't have any people on the record or using their names, so it's all made up, blah, 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 blah. And that became the discourse, right? Last year, John Kelly came out. John Kelly, former chief of staff, former Marine general, chief of staff to Donald Trump in his White House, came out and said on the record with his name, oh, yeah, that's true. He used to say suckers and losers all the time. He's confirmed it to any number of publications. He confirmed it on the record to me. And so what I get, even today, are people saying, well, you never proved it. And I said, well, actually, John Kelly's now said that, you know, he's heard Donald Trump say, you've never had any sources on the record. Well, John Kelly says it happened. Well, John Kelly's a liar. And it's, you know,
Right.
it's like, okay, like it doesn't matter. My point is it seems not to matter when you present people with what you consider to be evidence or what in traditional journalism modes was considered evidence. It doesn't matter anymore. People are impervious to new information if it doesn't conform to what they would like to believe. And so we see that writ large where, you know, the bubble around a certain group of people in America, let's say the hardcore Trump voters, the bubble is impermeable, right? There's no way of penetrating and saying, no, you said you wanted more evidence. Here's evidence. Nope, that evidence that's a deep fake. That evidence, nope, the person who says it to you is lying.
Yes, Jeff, but that's our tool. Like that's what we got. That's what we do. Like what we do is evidence, facts. We present those evidence and facts. And if those just drop dead to the ground, then what's our role? Like what are we doing?
Well, first of all, I never give up because why would you give up trying to convince people? A. B, and look, I do think this is a unique proposition of The Atlantic at this moment. I understand 30% of the people in America are really not going to believe or say they don't believe The Atlantic at this moment. So we're writing for the 70%, but I also think we're writing for the 30%. I think just because you're banging your head against the wall doesn't mean that wall is not eventually going to crack. And we have to find new ways of communicating, new ways of buttressing our reporting. I also believe that people change all the time. And just because this is the pattern and this is the path we're on doesn't mean that it's going to be this way forever. I mean, I guess I'm optimistic in the sense that I think, you know, we're in a fever period right now and that the fever will break. You know, my colleague, our colleague, Caitlin Flanagan always says that the truth bats last, and I hope she's right. It's just harder and harder. I mean, this calls back to a little bit of the Jeff Bezos piece in which he doesn't acknowledge that the reason the press is mistrusted is because powerful people are trying to get ordinary citizens to mistrust the press.
Right.
For their own selfish business reasons or political reasons. So we just have to keep going. I have a lot of criticism of publications, let's call them elite publications, that are written for, let's say, the 20% most liberal portion of America and don't even try to get to other people anymore. Like maybe it's a great business model and fine, everybody should do their thing, whatever. But I don't feel like the Atlantic is that. I think we have to try to build a bridge between, let's say, these two bubbles, the bubble in which quote unquote mainstream media lives and the bubble in which the hardcore Trump supporters live. I don't know it's a frustrating question because I don't know the answer. I haven't heard anybody come up with a formula for this, but we're just going to have to keep trying because the alternative, giving up, is pure nihilism to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are days before the election. We've lived through a Trump presidency. People are talking about this Trump presidency returning without the guardrails of the last one. So how do you see your role in that kind of administration?
I imagine that a coming theoretical second Trump administration is going to be somewhat very different than the first one. You've heard all these cliches before. There will be no grown-ups. Trump and his people know how to manipulate the workings of government better. The velociraptors have learned how to turn the door handles. You've heard all of the lines about it. So we can have more drama and more threats to the constitutional order and more threats to what we used to think of as normative political behavior. But I don't see our role changing in the sense that we're just going to write about it every day and we're going to cover it. And, I've said this to the staff before. The point of journalism or the satisfaction of journalism is not necessarily in changing the world for the better. If you change the world through your journalism to bring more light and truth and justice into the world, great. But you can't wake up every day assuming that's what's going to happen because most of it is frustrating. Just like any job in the world is going to be frustrating and progress, however you define it, is going to be incremental and you're not going to see it for a while and so on. But I think to myself, look, we're in a democratic emergency. I want to be able to tell myself as an old man that I did everything that I could do to try to bring the country back to some kind of normalcy, to hold people who are behaving abnormally accountable. And I want especially the younger people at the Atlantic to think to themselves, they want that 40 years from now, 50 years from now, when their grandchildren say, what did you do in that anti-democratic era? I want them to be able to say, I did everything that I could do. And that's important to me. And I held my own standards up. I held the standards of my magazine up. And I invested in a non-nihilistic way in the future of this country and the future of the ideas that animate it. And, that's enough. All you can do is try using your journalism techniques, using the techniques of journalism to bring more illumination to the things that, in this case, Donald Trump might do. So all we can do is go to work and write about what they're doing and cover what they're doing and hold it up to the light and let people judge for themselves if what they're doing is good or bad. So, it's anticlimactic in a way. It's not overly dramatic. It's the thing that we can do is go to work and do our jobs, the jobs that we were trained to do. We were not expecting people, my age, even your age or whatever. We've been in journalism for a while, never really expecting a presidency like the first Trump presidency and certainly what could be a second Trump presidency. Never really expecting anything like this, but here we are. So just cover the hell out of it and make sure that you have put into the public record truth and reality and evidence and, tell truth to power. You can't do anything more than that. And so all we're going to do is just do what we do.
I really appreciate that. I feel exactly the same way. There are words out there like anxious, afraid, apathetic. I don't feel any of those things. I feel alert.
Yeah, alertness is great. We have the tools to alert people to these changes. We don't have to sit there just passively or impotently. So work as hard as you can to bring as much information and analysis to people who need it. That's great. Great to have a great to have a job. Great to have a role.
Thank you for being inspirational, Jeff.
You want me to sing outtakes from Sound of Music?
I wouldn't mind if you could stand on the desk while doing it. It would be even better.
Climb every mountain. I'll sing the battle hymn. Look. If we have another Trump presidency, we're gonna get the staff every morning on Zoom to sing the battle hymn of the Republic together.
Sounds good. I'll practice.
Yeah, I'm sure people are gonna really enjoy that.
Sounds good. All right, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Kevin Townsend and edited by Claudina Bade. It was engineered by Rob Smirsiak. Claudina Bade is the executive producer of Atlantic Audio, and Andrea Valdez is our managing editor. I'm Hannah Rosen. Happy Halloween, get lots of candy, and don't forget to vote. Thank you for listening.